Thanks, Danny. You know, we're here at the Beer Shop, downtown Oak Park, and today I've got Dave Revsine with me. Dave, pleasure having you here. You're a fellow Oak Parker and fellow alum of Northwestern University, but more importantly for our purposes today, you're the lead studio host of the Big Ten Network, and you're the author of a book called The Opening Kickoff. First of all, the roots of this book, The Opening Kickoff, how did that all start out?
It started 4 years ago, or I guess 5 years ago now, because it came out last year. The paperback came out this year. I stumbled upon, I was looking through the ESPN College Football Encyclopedia, which is a massive tome. I mean, it's like a 1,000-page book.
Yeah.
And I was looking at kind of what the stories they had on each Big Ten school, and they had this one paragraph in the Wisconsin section about Pat ODay, who played at Wisconsin in the 1890s and was a great superstar, which I knew, actually. I was aware of him. I'd been at a Northwestern game in the early 80s with my dad, looking through the program, and they had this page about Northwestern records and opponent records. And Pat ODay had the longest field goal ever kicked against Northwestern. And then parenthetically it had said drop kick, which is why it stayed in my mind. I asked my dad what a drop kick was, and he kind of explained that, and was more than happy to explain it because the game, as they always were in that day and age, was totally out of hand.
This was a 34-game losing streak.
34-game losing streak.
Yeah.
So if he could talk about something other than what was happening on the field, he was delighted. And so that name stuck in my head. I stumble upon him again many, many years later, right? I mean, you're talking 30 years later. And my interest was a little piqued. Well, I remember him. And it talked about this disappearance in his life, that he had this kind of weird story after he graduated. And so I got on the internet and started reading about him, and I was just kind of transfixed. And I actually set out to write his life story. And in the process of doing that, realized there was kind of a bigger story, and that was the story of the origin of college football.
You know, one of the things that I was struck by in this book was how the more things change, the more they really stay the same, and that some of the issues that plague college sports, in college football in specific, are not new at all.
The epigraph of the book is, there's nothing new under the sun, from Ecclesiastes, and I think that kind of encapsulates what you're saying. That's my thesis, essentially, is that everything that's happening in college football today, whether it's good or bad, and I do think that because it makes headlines, I think a lot of the bad stuff has kind of stolen the narrative to a certain extent in the book, but I would say all the good stuff too. I mean, I would say the way that it impassions people, the way that it creates a connection to the alma mater. I mean, for a lot of these schools, it was a PR mechanism. I mean, that was kind of how it started. They realized that there was a power in this and getting people to connect to their school. The media coverage, the fact that it entertains people, all those things started in that time period too. But yeah, you're right. I mean, debates over amateurism and eligibility, whether or not players should be paid, huge injury crisis that went on at the time. So you could kind of go down the list of everything we talk about issue-wise in college football today, and it was all in this period. I argue that period, which I cover, which is 1890 to 1915, is the most important period in the history of the game. It was a period where the game nearly died and could have died. Right. And instead of dying, it flourished because of some alterations that were made, and it set it on this course for where it is today.
Yeah. Just the whole story with the University of Chicago, which was just a name, 1890, right? And gets rolling as a university, and that its means to get academic reputation was through football.
Yeah.
Which, it seems so far-fetched to think of that.
Well, I think there's always been this perception about Chicago, at least there was in my mind, that, well, they were a great powerhouse early on in the sport, and then the sport kind of got out of hand. And Chicago said, this is unseemly. We don't want to be a part of this anymore. Right. And I guess what I would say is if Chicago gave up football because it was unseemly, the unseemly world that they were dealing in was one that they, more than any school in the Midwest, helped create. Right. I mean, the University of Chicago, I would argue, was founded largely on football. Again, it was a marketing mechanism, a PR mechanism. You were talking about a school that was trying to put itself on the map, that wanted to instantly compete on a par with Princeton and Yale and Harvard. And that's really hard to do academically when you're starting a school from scratch. But it's not hard to do on the football field, right? All you need is a few guys, let in a couple ringers, and off you go. And that was exactly what they did. I mean, that was their model.
In the book, you talk about Pat ODay and his life after football, and fascinating stuff. And we won't spoil the plot, we don't have time. But can you just talk about, why has there not been a movie made of this guy?
Yeah, I think his life was unbelievable. I mean, a guy who comes over from Australia to follow his brother, who was the crew coach at Wisconsin, knows nothing at all about college football, and becomes a full-fledged superstar.
Stumbled into it.
Yeah,
It wasn't,
and literally known from coast to coast, and I think that's an incredible story.
So now you're with the Big Ten Network. You've been with them for the better part of a decade, or has it been more than 10 years now?
No, it has been. This is it's 8 years since we started this, our 9th football season.
Excellent. So, in that time, you've come to obviously be an expert in a lot of the things going on in each Big Ten school. You just on a bus trip.
Yeah.
All throughout the Big Ten. Can you talk about that? What your duties are over there, and what that takes to really be the lead studio host.
As far as my duties, I'm the lead host for football Saturdays, kind of in the studio, pregame, halftime, postgame, all of that. Same for conference basketball. I also do play-by-play for conference basketball, so I get to go out and do that. But yeah, I'm just kind of the primary guy over there, and it's just been a great deal.
So you started out with ESPN, or at least that's where you were for a good while before you came to the Big Ten Network. So tell me about that, going from a national brand to still national brand, but with a more regional focus.
Yeah, it's interesting. I get asked it a lot, kind of, what made you decide to make that move? And it was just such an obvious move for me. There's just such a connection.
It was like tailor-made for you? This was like
absolutely,
all set up
it was
for Dave
absolutely made for me. Yeah.
So it took you a few seconds to decide?
It never occurred to me not to take it. I'll say this, I did local small market news for 3 years before I got to ESPN. I was never the main guy. I was the weekend guy. And then at ESPN, there is no main guy, but certainly if there were one, it wasn't me.
Right.
You're a cog in that wheel, and it's a great wheel to be a cog in. I was absolutely delighted. I mean, when I got hired there in 1996, I'm 5 years out of college, and I spent 2 years doing something else. So, I mean, I was kind of 3 years into the profession, and there I am. So it was an incredible opportunity, but I just kind of felt like it was time to make a move. This is home. All of those things put together just made it a great fit.
So how do you keep your Northwestern bias out? Or do you?
No, I absolutely do. I mean, to the point where some of my buddies will leave me voicemail messages after broadcasts of particularly devastating defeats and say, you almost sounded like you were happy. What's wrong with you? What's become of you? I had a buddy who, after one basketball game where they were kind of on the fringe of making the NCAA tournament, and I was against Minnesota, I was doing the play-by-play, a guy, Blake Hofffarber, hits 3 or 4 three-pointers to break their back. And he literally he had DVR'd the game, and he left a voicemail playing back my excitement of these three-pointers, and he, kind of starts cursing me.
Well, it's the ultimate credit to your professionalism, to rise above.
I suppose.
I know you're a regular at the Huskies football games.
Yeah.
I've seen you there.
Yeah.
And so tell me about that. What brings you there, and what other things do you like to do in town?
What brings me to the games is that they're good, although we started going to the games before they were good, and it's been amazing to see the transformation. They've really improved dramatically.
And when you first moved to Oak Park, what drew you to the community?
It's such an interesting question. I'm not sure I have a great answer to it, other than I grew up in Northbrook, and I knew we didn't want to live there. I just kind of wanted to do something different, just kind of making my family's experience rather than repeating my childhood. I had a great childhood there, but I felt like I didn't want to just be running in the same people and doing everything that I did. Right. That wasn't kind of my idea. And so honestly, I just kind of asked around, well, if you don't live there, where do you live? Because I honestly didn't know. I grew up in Northbrook, I went to Northwestern, and then I left Chicago for 17 years.
Right.
So that was kind of trying to figure that out. And just so many people said Oak Park that I came out and looked at it, and we like older homes. A 100-year-old house just turned 100 this year, and that was something that we thought was cool, and it was the right fit. We like the vibe. We like the kind of people who choose to live here. I think you make certain choices if you decide to be in Oak Park.
Right.
And I like the choices that people made. I think kind of priorities are in the right place.
Yeah. Dave, I just want to thank you taking the time out of your schedule. I know we've got the football season upon us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And so I appreciate you and your time and all that you're doing, and wish you the best, and we'll see you around town.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Really, really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.